Hey guys, I'm Georgia and welcome back to my channel for the last ever books video I'm doing on this channel. I have made a second channel which will be linked in the top line description box down below. Please go and subscribe. I have chosen to separate my content for lots of reasons, most of which I'm not going to bore you with, but mostly because there's no denying most people are here on this channel, Georgia Marie, for my true crime content. And a lot of people don't click on my book stuff, which is totally fine, but I feel like it does both my true crime stuff and my book content a disservice because it's all a bit of a mishmash, a bit of like an amalgamation of just everything that I'm interested in. Brands don't really want to work with me because sort of when brands are looking at channels and trying to figure out like how many views you're going to get, they take into consideration like all of your videos, and my book videos bring down the side for my true crime videos and my history stuff, and all in all, business sense makes sense to have a second channel, but also because I want my book content to have a chance to thrive and a chance to sort of shine and do its own thing away from my true crime stuff. I want a place on the internet where I can be a little bit more like myself. Like, my true crime videos aren't about me, they're about the person I'm talking about. It's about victim advocation, but I want my book videos to be a bit more about me, not to sound big-headed. Also, on that note, I should say my history stuff, I should probably turn my laptop down, my iMac. My history stuff is also moving over with me to my new second channel, again, just because I want my main channel to be true crime, and I feel like history and book stuff, I get kind of like the same-ish amount of views, I get the same people interested in that kind of stuff. Makes sense to move my history stuff over. Anyway, long story short, I've got a second channel now, so please, if you're interested in my book stuff or my history stuff, please do go and subscribe over there. I'm really excited for it. I've got some really big plans. I know a lot of people have said that they don't want me to have a second channel, they like everything being in one place. So do I. Honestly, it's easier for me. This is going to be a lot more hard work having two separate channels, but just makes sense. So please go and support me on both. But this does mean as well that I'm going to be delving into a lot more book content than just my standard 10 books I've read recently videos. I've got a whole list of ideas, but I would love to hear what kind of book content you would like to see from me. So please do leave any ideas you've got in the comments as well. I'm really excited for this, and I hope you guys are as well. Oh, also, if you just want to go and like search up my second channel, it's called Stories with Georgia Marie. I thought that was cute. Anyway, I've been rambling on for long enough. Let's get into the 10 books I have read most recently, starting with this, The Power by Naomi Alderman. This book is my least favourite book I've read all year. I hated this so much, and it literally won the Women's Prize for Fiction in 2017. It was the winner. I cannot fathom why. I really hated this book. I might actually go as far as say this is my least favourite book of all time. And what really hurt me about this one is it had such an interesting blurb, like such an interesting premise, and I was really drawn in by it. I've heard people talking about this and I've always thought it sounded really interesting. So basically, this is a world in which women suddenly discover they have this power, and I'm not talking like a metaphorical power, like a literal physical, like electric zappy zap power. And it's a pretty deadly power in which they can like kill men just by like touching them. And it's this like flip where men have always been the ones in power, it's always been the patriarchy, then all of a sudden women literally have all the power. And it's just a look at what that world looks like. And it's described as a feminist novel, and this is not feminist at all. It's really rough to read. So this book basically follows, I think it is 3 or 4 different characters, none of which are likeable. So there's, I can't remember any of their names. I blocked this entire book out of my brain because I just hated this. One of them is like a leader in society. I think she was like a mayor or something, and it sort of follows her story. There's another one who is a teenage girl who is basically being abused in her like foster home, and she runs away, and then it follows her story. Another one is like a daughter of like a mobster or a gangster who was like the most powerful woman in the whole world, like her power is stronger than anyone else's. And then there's a man who is basically a journalist, and he is sort of following the stories of this power around the world and reporting about it. And ironically, the only sort of storyline perspective that I was even slightly interested in was the man's. What is his name? Oh yeah, Tunde. Yeah, his perspective I found quite interesting from like a journalist point of view, but that is about all I can give this book. The basic like idea of this book is if women suddenly got power, they would be worse than men. Like they would rape and kill and just cause destruction and start wars. And that is what would happen if women were in power. And it's described as a feminist read, and I don't think that is feminism. It was just really, really, really dark. Like so dark, so far over the edge. And a lot of the time I couldn't really tell you the reason for the violence or why it's happening. It's just very, very shallow, I found. Like there's no like reasoning behind like we're going to treat men this way because this is what they did to us, or there's no sort of like thought behind it. It just is violence for the sake of violence, and I found it really, really rough to read. I found because it was following the perspectives of so many different characters, each one was just really, really dull. Like you never really got to know any of them. It was all very, very surface level. I think it would have been better if you were just following the story of like one character instead of like jumping between all these different perspectives, because also I found the women were really, really similar, and they were really similarly written as well, so I could never really tell who was talking at any one point. One of the women becomes like a religious figure, like a god of some kind, and I found the discussion of religion in this book really, really out of place as well. It just didn't really seem to fit with what I expected this book to be going in, and maybe that was my problem. Maybe I had like expectations of what I thought this was going to be, and it just wasn't that at all. But I just don't think there was anything good about this book. It didn't like make me want to carry on reading. It didn't like enthrall me in any way. I wasn't intrigued as to where it was going to end, because it's just dark from the outset, so I knew it was just not going to end very well. Also, there's no discussion at all around trans people in this book, which I found really odd, because this would have been a really interesting perspective to sort of look at, not for the whole book to be about it, but just like when you're talking about a world in which women suddenly have powers, like what about trans women? Do they have power? Do they not? Trans men, do they have power? Do they not? Like it's just not even like brought up, and I thought that would be a really interesting perspective to look at it from. But yeah, I just didn't like this. Like literally, it's got a review on the back that says The Hunger Games crossed with The Handmaid's Tale. If you took the worst parts of all of those books and put them together, maybe you'd get this. Don't waste your time. Awful. Hated it. But not to be too negative, because we're going straight from worst book of the year to my favourite book so far of the year. This is Delilah Green Doesn't Care by Ashley Herring Blake. I love this book so much. Me and Delilah Green had such a good time together. I read this over my birthday when I had COVID, and it feels like some sort of fever dream. I got so immersed in this story and in these characters that I literally felt like I was living in this world, and maybe it was just a bit of like COVID fever, but it really got me. Like I want to be in this world. I feel like these characters are real. I want them to be my friends. I've said in many a book video, I'm sure, that I just don't like romance books. I'm not a romance book kind of gal, not for me. Turns out I was wrong. I don't hate romance books. I hate straight romance, which makes sense seeing as I am not straight romance. Sapphic romance book, however, sign me up. I am there. I am all about it. I am obsessed. I think because there's never really been any adult sapphic romance books. Like there's a couple for sure, but it's always been really, really hard to find. But in the last couple of years, it's just boomed, and there are now so many. I'm trying to read all of them, and I'm just obsessed. This is the best one I've read. It is so good. So this is the story of Delilah Green. She is this fierce, independent photographer living in New York City who had a really rough upbringing. Her dad died, I think her mum died as well, and so she was left to be raised by her stepmum with her stepsister. And her stepmum just didn't really like her and never made any effort, and her stepsister, they just didn't get each other. Like they weren't particularly friends, they never made the effort growing up. So as soon as Delilah finished school, hit 18, she left the little hometown, which is called Bright Falls, and went to New York and never went back. And then she gets basically an email, I think, from her stepmom saying that she needs to come back and photograph her stepsister's wedding. And she doesn't want to, but there's a lot of money in it. So Delilah heads back to Bright Falls, and on the first night there, she runs into her stepsister, so her stepsister is called Astrid, runs into Astrid's old school friends and immediately fancies one of Astrid's best friends, and from there you can guess where the story's going. So this is a romance story between Delilah and Claire, and it's fun and it's sexy, and Ashley Herring-Blake just has such a way of writing romance. It feels like tangible, like it feels like it's actually there, and the feelings she writes and describes are so clear. Like every step of the way I knew exactly what Delilah and Claire were feeling. Like it was just so clear and understandable. And even though there is kind of like a miscommunication trope in this book, it's not between these characters, which I found really, really refreshing. I generally hate miscommunication. I don't know if it is just because like in sapphic relationships, from my experience and from a lot of people's experiences, communication is generally a lot clearer. Like some of my straight friends talk about their relationships with their boyfriends and I'm like, why just talk? Like this could have been avoided if you just like spoke about your feelings. And I think it's very much like a lesbian thing just to talk about everything at length all the time. So the miscommunication trope in like sapphic books, I always find is a bit like, doesn't really work. But it works in the context of this book because it's not between these two, it's between the sisters. And I don't want to say anything because I don't want to spoil it, but it's just so good. Actually, maybe I wouldn't even say the trope in this is so much miscommunication. It's just like misunderstanding. It's like people misunderstanding who others are on like the most basic of levels. And it's a really complex storyline. Like it looks like it's just going to be like a little fluffy romance, but it's really, really deep. You've got Claire, who's a single mum, Delilah, who is like super fierce and independent because of all like the stuff she had to deal with in her childhood. You've got her sister Astrid, who is like going through a really shit relationship and it's her wedding. She's trying to figure it all out. And they've got Iris as well, who's sort of the third, fourth person in the friendship group, who is like also going through her own relationship struggles. Every character feels so fully fleshed out. And the book isn't that long. And there's actually a second book coming out in the series. It's called Astrid Parker Doesn't Fail. So it's about Delilah's stepsister Astrid. And I think that's also sapphic. So I'm very excited to read that as well. I just want more of these characters. Like I just want these characters to be my friends in real life. I loved it so much. It is absolutely boiling in here. It is so hot. So if I'm looking sweaty, then that's exactly what it is. I am sweating. There's also some roadworks going on like the main road outside my house. And it must be really loud because the roadworks are quite far down, but I can hear them, so I hope you can't. Fingers crossed, I'm not refilming this. Next up we have another sapphic romance book. There are going to be many in this video and in future videos, so just be warned. They are the kind of books that I seem to be like gravitating towards at the moment. This is definitely more of a YA sapphic romance. This is I Kiss Shara Wheeler by Casey McQuiston. The same Casey McQuiston of Red, White and Royal Blue fame and One Last Stop. I love both those books. Those books are like two of my favourite books ever. So I had really high hopes for this. And I must admit, this is my least favourite of the three that she's written. But it's not bad by any means. I still really enjoyed it. So this is about Chloe Green. She's in school. She's one of those students who is like top of the class in everything. Chloe like prides herself on being like the smartest person in a room. And she wants to be like top of the year when she graduates. But there's one person standing in the way, and that is Shara Wheeler. Shara Wheeler is also like, she's like her bitter academic rival. And Chloe like hates Shara, but doesn't really know why. She just really doesn't like her. And then one day Shara Wheeler kisses her and then Shara just disappears and Chloe is left so confused because she's got no idea why Shara Wheeler just like kissed her. Think Paper Towns vibes. It's very similar to Paper Towns, but it's like gay. So Chloe breaks into Shara Wheeler's bedroom and basically looks for clues as to where she's gone, why she kissed her, what the hell's going on. And she finds out that Shara also kissed two other people, both boys, shortly before she disappeared as well. So the three of them go on a hunt to figure out why Shara kissed them and where on earth has she gone? Why did she run away? Luckily for them though, Shara has left a treasure hunt for them to follow and try and figure out where on earth she is. And it is very Paper Towns, I'm not going to lie to you, but it's gay Paper Towns basically. And I didn't find Shara or Chloe to be particularly likeable characters. I didn't really like either of them and therefore I didn't really feel myself rooting for their relationship, but it was still really cute nonetheless. I found I really liked the side characters in this book though, and I found there was a lot of representation without it feeling too forced. There is something I often find in sort of like gay fiction, particularly in YA gay fiction, that authors try and like cram in as much representation as they possibly can because they want everyone to like feel included and feel a part of it, which is absolutely lovely, but sometimes it's just a bit like, this doesn't feel like it's real life. It doesn't feel representative. It's like you can tell when somebody puts a character in just for like representation points because they're not fully fleshed out and they're just there because they're like an asexual character or they're non-binary and there's no like real character development there. That does really, really bug me because I hate it when people do that. But there's a lot of representation in this, but it doesn't feel forced. It doesn't have that. With every year that goes by, I get a year older, I get that 1 year closer to 30, and I think maybe I just need to give up on YA because I feel like I'm always like judging it through an adult lens. But tell you what, you'll be prying YA books out of my cold, dead hands because I just find myself always going back to them. I find them really easy to read, and if I do sort of like find myself judging it from like an adult perspective, I've got to remind myself like, no, if I was a teenager, I would have absolutely gone mad for this. And I tell you what, if I had this when I was a teenager, this would have been absolutely destroyed with how much I read it. I think I would have loved this, and I think for so many teenagers as well, it's really important to have books like this. So if you're a teenager, pick this up. If you like an enemies to lovers kind of situation, particularly like an academic enemies to lovers, you will go feral for this. Moving on to The Girl Before by J.P. Delaney, this was a very average, very run-of-the-mill thriller. Like, it was okay. Would I recommend it? Maybe, if there's nothing else. Like, it was fine. It didn't make me like lose my mind or anything like that. It was just very much okay. However, they did make this into a TV show, I'm pretty sure, so clearly some people thought it was really good, or some people thought it would make a really good TV show. I am kind of intrigued to watch it, I think. Maybe I will. So this follows the point of views of two different characters. So you've got Jane and Emma. You're both following them about 2 or 3 years apart, I think, as they're moving into the same house. And I can't remember which one came first. Wait a sec. Okay, yeah, so it was Emma first. So Emma moved into the property a couple of years before Jane. And this was a very unique, one-of-a-kind property, minimalist, designed by this like world-famous architect who has very, very, very strict rules about who he lets live in this house. So Emma moves in and things happen while she lived there, and Jane moves in a couple of years later, hears the rumours of the previous tenant dying, and Jane kind of has to figure out why she died, what happened, because similar things start happening to her. She finds out that she looks very, very, very similar to Emma. They have very similar personalities, similar stories. Why have they both been allowed to move in there? What happened? Is it going to happen to Jane as well? I must admit, it did kind of keep me on my toes. I didn't really guess what was going on until pretty much the end when it reveals what was going on, which I do really like because I find I read so many sort of psychological thrillers that I am quite good at guessing what's going to happen. But this one, I didn't really guess. I had an inkling, but I wasn't 100% sold on it. It also kind of flips the script on you about halfway through the book. I wouldn't necessarily call it a twist, but it just goes to show to never trust the perspectives you're hearing in this book. I found that really clever and really interesting, and not something that you often see in these kind of books. It wasn't something I expected to happen. I don't want to say anything because I don't want to spoil it. But they're like the good things I'll say about it. The bad things, I'll say it tries really hard to be sexy, and I just didn't find it sexy at all. I actually found it a little bit cringy. I didn't really enjoy that aspect of it. And what else? Yeah, that's about it. I don't really have anything particularly good or bad to share with you about this. It was just very average, very run-of-the-mill. It was alright. If you come across it and it's cheap, then it wouldn't be a waste of money, but I wouldn't like tell you to go out and run to the Waterstones to buy it. Oh, also remember what I was going to say. The characters, because they're so similar, and that's like a really big plot point of the book, these women are really, really similar, but it also does mean that it's really hard to remember whose point of view you're reading from, just because how are you supposed to when they're so similar? And I found that quite annoying. I kept having to like jump back to the beginning of the chapter to like see who was talking. But yeah. Then we have Dolores by Laura and Amy Curtis. This is pretty much just a short story. I gave this 2.5 stars. I thought it was fine. It wasn't anything special. I really struggle with like contemporary fiction. That's just not my kind of vibe. It's not the books I tend to lean towards. And therefore, this book was never going to be like 100% my cup of tea. I find I need a really, really strong plot for me to like feel enticed to finish and like pick up a book. So when a book doesn't really have much of a plot and it's very like slow moving, it's very much like a character study, I do find that really, really tough to get through. And if this book was any longer, I probably would have given up on it completely, but it is literally like 100 and something pages, like 120 pages. So I did finish it. The writing I thought was fine, like it was good writing, it's just not my genre, it's not the kind of thing that I would generally reach for. So this is a story of a teenage girl who finds herself on the steps of a convent, like desperately needs some help, and the nuns take her in, and the nuns name her Dolores. That's not her real like birth name, but we never find out what her actual name is. And the story sort of flips to and from the past, so her teenage years, what sort of led her to being in this position on the steps of a nunnery, just asking for help, and then her life in the convent. Only what it seems the nuns don't know is that Dolores is actually pregnant. That's why she's come to the convent. And I found it really confusing as to whether or not they knew she was pregnant or not. Like, even at the end of the book where she gives birth, I don't think that's a spoiler, that's kind of what the whole thing is like leading up towards. I don't know if the nuns knew she was pregnant. You don't know what their thoughts or feelings on it are, unless I missed something, which is very much possible. I found it really strange that their like reaction to it wasn't really like noted. Maybe that's the point. I need a plot, I need like twists and turns, I need things to happen for me to like really be hooked. So like I said, you don't know her actual name, you don't even know where she's from, you're given like glimpses of the character, you're given like glimpses of the things she did in her teenage years, nothing even awful, but it's just like she made a few wrong choices and ended up where she is. And she wasn't particularly likeable, but then again, you barely got to know her. It's 120 pages long. You don't know loads about who this girl is. Actually, the only thing I'd say that is descriptive of is like the nuns. It really paints a picture of like the nuns and the convent, and like not always in a really like flattering way, but always in a very fond way. I find myself wondering like what personal connection the author has to that kind of world, because it felt really like full of fondness and love, but also quite critical at times as well. I don't know, I'm not very good at giving like critical reviews, but it was fine. Again, I wouldn't like recommend it, but if you're interested or if you want a short story to like blast through in a few hours, then this is the one for you. But I don't know. Maybe I should actually read this like comment on the back from Sue Rainsford, author of Follow Me to the Ground. I've never heard of it, but we'll go with Sue's comment. Rich, melodic, and marked by troubling sensuality, Dolores depicts the strange pleasures a young girl might take in her body and the perils and liberations such pleasures hold. Lovelist by Alice Oseman. Oh my god, I loved this book so much. I was fully on the Heartstopper train. I loved Heartstopper so much, and as soon as I watched the series, I ordered the Heartstopper book. But I also ordered Lovelist by Alice Oseman because I wanted to order one of her like actual books. She's got a few actual books as well as like the graphic novel series. Jack Edwards raves about this one all the time and it sounded really interesting, so I chose to pick this one up. This is the story of Georgia, and she is about to go to university and she is like determined to have her first kiss before she goes to university. She's like obsessed with love and romance, or the ideas of love and romance, and she can't understand why everyone else is like having their first and she's just never kissed anyone. What's wrong with her? She goes out to search for her first kiss, and in doing so realises that she actually doesn't really want to kiss anyone. Like, when it comes down to the reality of having somebody in front of her that she goes to kiss, she realises that she's actually pretty repulsed by it and she doesn't want to do it at all. And I didn't expect to enjoy this book as much as I did. I didn't really know, I don't know what I was expecting, but as you can guess, this is the story of Georgia discovering that she is asexual, aromantic. She's not interested in any sort of romantic or sexual relationship with anyone. And I don't know why. That plot line just didn't really appeal to me, but I'm so glad I read this because I really, really did love it. Have I mentioned the main character's called Georgia? Because the main character's called Georgia, which is just another reason to love it. It's a great name. But I found I could relate to this book a lot, and not just because I share the same name as the main character. I found a lot of what Georgia was saying about like being asexual, aromantic, having that repulsion, I could really relate to, as a lot of what I felt during my teenage years just about the male sex in general. And there were feelings that I never really fully understood at the time. Like when she's talking about like being sort of confronted with somebody she's about to have a first kiss with, and she's like, I don't want to do this is disgusting. That's the way I felt for a lot of my life. I felt like a lot of like romance, a lot of like sexual attraction is just, you just gotta put on a brave face, you just gotta do it. Like everyone else does it, nobody really enjoys doing it, but you just gotta do it. Until I eventually realised that I'm not interested in men in that way at all, and that's why I felt that way. But I did feel that way about women, but Georgia obviously doesn't feel that way about anyone, and I found that really, really interesting. And the AIDS community is pretty neglected, even within the LGBTQ plus community. Within representation, like I said, there are more sapphic books coming out than ever before. There's more gay books. Books about ace people, there's not many of those. So I feel like this really like feels a niche, and they did it so, so well. I also really loved how the main characters in this, like they're just finishing school, going into uni. It follows their first year at Durham University. And they feel like uni students. They're not aged up, they're not aged down, they like feel like the age they're supposed to be. And I find that really frustrates me, particularly when I read books by American authors. I find that the teenagers are always often aged up. It's the same with like American media on TV as well, and like in movies. Teenagers feel so much older, but Alice Oseman did a really good job of just like writing teenagers as teenagers, and I really, really, really appreciated that. Like, if there's one thing Alice Oseman can do, it is write a character and, like, fully flesh them out as well. It was so good. And just the focus on, like, platonic love in this book, like, the power of platonic friendship love, it's something that I think is really going to stay with me for a long time. I really recommend this book. The next couple of books I have to talk about I actually read on my Kindle, so I don't have them to show you. The first of which is Sweetbriar Rose by Alex Smith. This is, I think, the 7th book in the DCI Ket series. I've spoken about at least one of these books in every single one of my sort of 10 books I've read recently videos in the last 2 years, so I'm not going to go on about it too much. If you're looking for a really good like police procedural crime series, I highly recommend the DCI Ket series. This book in particular focused on sort of fairy tales. So there's a mass murderer going around, or trying to be a mass murderer, kidnapping girls and staging them in scenes out of fairy tales. Basically, that's a very brief description of what this book is about. I really like this one. I gave it 4 stars. But read the whole series. If you're going to read it, do the whole series. Oh, I think I said it was the 7th book in the series, didn't I? It's the 8th. It's the 8th book in the series. I think I've only got 2 more to read after this one. And then I read Must Love Silence by Lucy Bexley. This was actually on Kindle Unlimited. I picked it up just because it was a free sapphic book on Kindle Unlimited, and I didn't have particularly high expectations, and good job I didn't, because I didn't like this book at all. But I will give props to the author because it is their first full-length novel and they have potential. I think they are a really good writer, but it just needs fine-tuning. I think they're like plot and character kind of progression needs work, but generally, like, I could see where the story was going. It just needed a few more edits, I think. Like, one of the main things in this that really bothered me was a lack of continuity. So at one point a character would like pick up a mug of tea and then it would just be forgotten about, or like a door would be closed, then all of a sudden they're like in the room and they've opened the door, but it doesn't say any of that stuff. And it sounds like stuff like in books you don't need to describe like every movement they make, but it was things that I actually noticed whilst I was reading the book, and I was like, oh, what happened to that, what happened to that? I think most authors have a way of like subtly alluding to like characters making those movements and doing those things, whereas in this book it just felt really like sudden, like it was just forgotten about, like it was just bad writing. So this is a story about pretty much an agoraphobic audiobook narrator. It's never explicitly said that the main character is agoraphobic, but that's definitely the vibe that I got from it. She basically never ever leaves her flat, doesn't want to leave her flat, isn't interested in the outside world, gets like really bad anxiety at the thought of leaving her flat. But then all of a sudden she gets this job opportunity and she's just like on a plane to New York. Like the agoraphobia is like suddenly not really much of an issue anymore, and she can leave the flat, she just didn't want to, but also it terrified her. It was very strange. I feel like it needed a little bit more like character building to get to that point. But yeah, so this, I can't remember the character's name, and I would tell you, but I don't have my Kindle on me to look. So she goes to New York to basically record this audiobook for a author who is known to be really difficult, and it's very much supposed to be an enemies to lovers kind of trope. I mean, I don't feel like they really like built on the enemies aspect of it at all. I feel like the author very much alluded to the fact this author was very difficult and maybe they like had a couple of crosswords, but then all of a sudden they were like sleeping together, and it had like the element of enemies to lovers, but it just needed a bit more like bang, you know? Did I even say this is another sapphic romance? Of course. This was like a fun, easy read. Like I read it and I didn't like find it difficult to get to the end of. Like I feel like I'm being really negative about it. I got to the end of it and it wasn't a chore and I was happy to pick it up and carry on reading it. I just feel like the writing needed a little bit more work. What else have I written about it? I've got sex scenes in it were okay. They were not on the Delilah Green kind of level. I feel like they lacked chemistry. But again, like the author really, really tried. And it relied a lot on cliches, I found. There were a lot of like cliches in the book that were sort of like followed through on. The same mistake was made by the same character like 4 or 5 different times throughout the book. And I was like, come on, surely you would learn after the first, if not the second. Like this is just something, it was like a cliche that just kept coming up. And I was like, come on. If you've got Kindle Unlimited and you want a quick, easy sapphic read, then it is cute. It's really cute, but I just wouldn't necessarily recommend it. But talking of sapphic books, I would recommend Last Night at the Telegraph Club by Melinda Lowe. I love this book so much. This is definitely not a fast-paced kind of book. It's not the kind of book you speed through in one night. This is the kind of book where you've got to savour every single word, every single page. You've got to savour every aspect of the story. It's just really beautifully written. So this is about a Chinese-American teenager called Lily, and she is trying to find her place in the world in the 1950s. She is from a Chinese-American family in the middle of the Red Scare in San Francisco, and she's got to be so careful about bringing attention to herself and therefore her family. Lily is very much expected to conform, be a good Chinese daughter, don't bring any attention to herself or her family, but she's also slowly realising that she's gay, and how is she going to explore that aspect of herself in the 1950s, in the middle of a Red Scare, and not hurt anyone. As someone who is quite clearly obsessed with queer history and queer culture, I absolutely lapped this book up. I enjoyed every second of it. At the back of the book there's like a index where Melinda Lowe goes into detail, like author's notes, about all of the decisions she made in this book about like the 1950s and San Francisco. And it talks about the history of those things and like the intersectionality of being Chinese American and being gay in the 1950s. Like even as Lily slowly gets more and more immersed in the queer culture in San Francisco, she goes to the Telegraph Club a lot with the girl who becomes her girlfriend. She is still treated as an outsider, as exotic. She's called like China doll because she is Chinese in a very white space. And it does a really good job of exploring all of those things and bringing it all together to create this one fully fledged, like multi-dimensional character. There's also short chapters throughout the book where it's not from Lily's perspective, it's from her family's perspective, like her mum, her dad, her aunt, and why they are the way they are and why they expect the things they expect of Lily. And you want to be mad at her parents for treating her the way they do or making Lily feel like she can't be who she is. But it is 1950s, she's Chinese American in San Francisco, it's the Red Scare, and you understand why her parents act the way they do, why they're doing the things they do. And I've just never read another book like this. I just enjoyed it so much. I just savoured every single page. It took me, I think, about a week to read, just because I didn't really want it to end and I wanted to like fully immerse myself in it. Yeah, I really love this. And the last book I have is She's Too Pretty to Burn by Wendy Hurd. I gave this one 3.5 stars. I thought it was very much okay. I did enjoy it. I read it when I was on a cruise last month. I just sat by the pool and probably read it in like 3-4 hours. I definitely zoomed through it. A lot of people say this is a sapphic retelling of Picture of Dorian Gray. And I must admit I've never read The Picture of Dorian Gray. A Picture of Dorian Gray. Don't know. I've never read it, so I don't really get that reference, but I saw a lot of reviews on Goodreads and people saying like, it's very loosely that. Apparently it's not really that similar. I'd call this a YA sapphic thriller. It's set at the end of a summer and Wendy Hurd does a really good way of writing this like really hot, sticky, sweaty heat. Like I very much felt like I was there, even though I was literally in Norway and it was really cold on this cruise, but I could like really like picture myself in this story, which I really appreciated. And this is a story of two girls. They meet at a party, Mick and... Why am I so bad at remembering characters' names? Wait a sec. Mick and who are you? Who is the other character? What's her name? Veronica. Veronica? Mick and Veronica. So they meet at a party and they immediately have this like really intense kind of love affair. And Veronica had this other friend called... Jesus Christ... Nico, another friend called Nico, and Nico is very much involved in the sort of like installation art scene, and Nico is a bit of a criminal, but not like a criminal. He's just like an environmental activist and uses his art to make statements about what's going on in the world, and Mick and Veronica get a little bit too involved in his art and they get too immersed in it and they end up doing something that's pretty illegal. And it's about them sort of like making peace with what they've done and running from the law, trying to like make sure they don't get caught for what they did. And yeah, I enjoyed it. It was alright. One of the like main plot points in this is that Veronica is a photographer, so she's also an artist, but she uses photos as her like form of art. And Mick is apparently this beautiful like model style girl, but her mum's a model and she's got a lot of like trauma from her mum being a model and trying to like force her to do photo shoots. So Mick hates having her photo taken, but Veronica's like insistent on taking Mick's photo, and then all of a sudden one day Mick's like, oh yeah, you can take my photo now, and she's suddenly over it. And it was such a big plot point for so much of the book, then all of a sudden it's like not an issue anymore. I found that a little bit weird. What else do I have on my notes? It's got twists and turns, it's dark and fast paced. It seems to forget they're teenagers. It was like I was saying earlier about like American writers writing teenagers like they're older. These don't read like teenagers at all. They definitely read like pretty established adults. But I mean, if you're not reading it because they're teenagers, I suppose it doesn't really matter, but they're meant to be like 16, 17 years old and they did not read like that at all. I think you'd probably enjoy this a lot more if you're an artist yourself and you like appreciate art. There's like a lot of really like descriptive paragraphs about art and Nico's installation art and like what he's doing. I found all that went a bit over my head. Like all in all, I did enjoy this book. It's not the best book I've ever read. It's not the worst. It's probably worth a read. I think if you're like a young adult teenager, you'll probably really enjoy this. And there you go, there are 10 books I've read recently. I am sweating profusely. It is so hot in here. It's not even that hot today, it's like 22 degrees, but apparently my office is an actual sauna. So I'm going to sign off here really quickly. If you do want to go and subscribe to my second channel, please do. I've got some really fun, exciting things planned over there. If you like my history content, please, again, make sure you go and subscribe over there because I want to continue doing my history stuff, but people don't really seem to care about true crime and history, but I love doing the history stuff, so I'm going to continue anyway. I'm just going to do it on a different channel. Yeah, I suppose that's it. Thank you so much for watching. If you've got any book recommendations for me, put them down below. I'll also put my Goodreads down below as well, so you can go follow me there. Bye!